Hi everyone, Chad here. Thanks for joining me. Imagine a situation where you are doing size exclusion chromatography, trying to separate two closely related proteins. You have two columns, each one has the same fractional range, but the resins are from different manufacturers. So, how do you know if one is better than the other? Or, let's say you had an old column that worked great, but it got destroyed for some reason. So you bought a new one to replace the old one, and how do you know if the new one is as good as the old one? Well, there is an easy way to answer these questions. Plates. Not those kinds of plates, though. These kinds. The kind from a distillation tower. Theoretical plates are the most useful way to measure the efficiency of a column. I'm mostly going to be describing theoretical plates in terms of proteins, because that's what my channel focuses on. But if you're working in analytical chemistry, pharmaceuticals, or biotech, understanding this concept is crucial for optimizing your separations. So let's get started. The concept of distillation is very old, dating back to antiquity, and people have been using fractional distillation for separating spirits and petroleum for what seems like forever. But it wasn't until about the 1930s that laboratories really understood the value of fractional distillation and developed precise distillation equipment. Distillation towers for petroleum are made out of a stack of actual plates. At each plate, there is an equilibrium between the different substances. Lighter agents like gasoline and jet fuel float to the top, and heavier substances like asphalt sink to the bottom. In the laboratory, we don't use actual plates. Instead, we use plates as a unit of measure. With chromatography, a separation is going on, but it's dependent upon the relative mobility of the two individual proteins you're trying to purify, not the vapor pressure. Theoretical plate height, often referred to as HETP, height equivalent to a theoretical plate, is a way to measure the efficiency of the column. Like the distillation tower, we can divide a column up into little zones of separation. In each zone, a new equilibrium is established between two closely related proteins. We can imagine dividing a column up into little sections where each section is a plate, like on the distillation tower. The more plates you have in a column, the better the separation. You can get more plates in one of two ways, either making your column longer or making the height of a plate smaller, so you're packing more plates into the same space. We can calculate plates using this equation where N is the number of plates per meter. VR is the volume of mils of the peak retention time. WH is the width at half the peak height. HETP is the inverse of N, so HETP equals 1 over N. In fact, I prefer just to use the number of plates N because I think the number is easier to wrap your head around instead of the HETP. For example, the difference between 6,000 and 7,000 plates is easier to understand than the difference between 0.000160 and 0.000142. My brain just naturally can understand that 7,000 is bigger than 6,000. I usually just say the number of plates too, as in the number of plates per meter. It assumes that all columns for one particular use that you're trying to do have about the same size, which is typically true. You might have a tiny difference between, one column from the other. And don't worry about the math that I'm showing here. I'm just showing you the equation so that you know where the numbers are coming from. Most chromatography software, like Unicorn, will calculate the number of plates per meter for you. Asymmetry is also very important, as it is a measure of how close the peak is to the ideal Gaussian shape. Asymmetry is calculated using this equation, where A and B are half the width at 10% the peak height. Asymmetry can tell you a lot about what is going on. For example, if the peak is tailing to the right, then the resin is likely too loose or the adapter is too high. If it is tailing to the left, the column is likely packed too tightly. Asymmetry normally only applies to longer columns like SCC and not to shorter affinity columns, because there needs to be enough time for mixing to occur for the peak to take shape. But you can still get some useful information with asymmetry on shorter columns. So how exactly do you do a measurement? The method I prefer is to inject a high concentration salt bolus into the column and monitor the conductivity. I'll usually use 1 molar sodium chloride solution for the bolus and have the column equilibrated in 150 millimolar sodium chloride. You want the bolus injection volume to be between 1 and 3% of the column volume. The higher the percent injection, the more plates you get. The column needs to be equilibrated in 150 millimolar sodium chloride, because if you just use water, the difference in density between the water and the salt bolus will reduce mixing, and the peak width will be artificially narrow, resulting in more plates than the column really deserves. Also, for this to work, the column and the solution have to be fully equilibrated into the same temperature. I usually use sodium chloride because it's cheap and easily available, but you can use any salt. I also see people use 0.1% acetone in water for the bolus injection. With acetone, you monitor UV at 280, not conductivity. I don't use acetone myself because we normally don't have any in the lab, and I think acetone-based measurements are less sensitive to temperature, which is a benefit over using salt. Whatever you use, the most important thing is that you stay consistent with both your setup and your solutions. For example, always use the same percent volume for injection into your column. If you're using 2%, always use 2% of the column volume for the salt bolus injection. Likewise, your chromatography setup is very important. If you're using any kind of AKTA system, you have to inject using either the sample loop or the sample pump. You cannot inject through the system pump, because as you pass through the space where the pump heads are and also pass through the mixer, the bolus will be diluted or mixed. The bolus needs to be injected directly onto the column. So now, with all that said, here's how we will have to set up the system for an actual run. It's very simple. The 150 millimolar sodium chloride is going to be on the inlet A1. The column is going to the column valve, and the 1 molar sodium chloride will be on the sample pump. A simpler alternative would be to use the bolus in the sample loop, like I already said. I suppose it is possible to run this procedure using manual instructions, but you're more likely to have success in reproducing your measurements using a method. I've written a method for the Avant and put it below. Determining the number of plates is so fundamental for chromatography that I plan to put out videos for writing plate measurements for other systems as well, like the Purifer or maybe the Pilot. So after you've actually done the run on the column, how do you actually determine the number of plates in Unicorn? So this is how you do it in the classic evaluation. So the first thing you'll notice is I don't have the conductivity curve up, so I'm just going to turn off all these other curves. Go to customize. Sorry, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to customize, and I'm going to turn on conductivity and just turn off all the other ones. So there's a nice conductivity curve. Now I'm going to go to integrate, and I'm going to integrate the conductivity peak. And here in this window on the left, I'm going to select the curve that I want to integrate, which is conductivity. Here's my peak table. That's where my results will end up. I can label this anything I want, so I'm just going to do conductivity table. Now, the next thing I can do too is I can tell the system, like, if I want to, define my parameters a little bit more narrowly. And I've actually integrated this before, and I know I end up getting a bunch of weird peaks over here. So this is actually a button. Something's kind of wonky about my setup because I'm doing a remote desktop. But I'm going to hit reject peaks, and I'm just going to say I want the 2 largest peaks. And I'm going to hit OK, OK, and there we go. So there's my peak right there. I think the baseline should be flat, so I'm going to go over here to integrate, and I'm going to edit baseline, and I'm just going to take any one of these little gray squares, I'm going to move it, and I'm going to pull this one down so that it's flat. There we go. It's important to have a flat baseline because part of the plate calculation is how high your peak is. And I'm just going to save it as the same table. Okay, there we go. I've got a flat baseline now, and the column appears that says plates per meter and also plate height. Again, I'm sorry about my display here, but you can see that I have 4,600 plates, and the plate height, that really says plate height there, is 0.02. Okay, if you don't have the plates per meter, you can right click in the this table, the peak data table, and hit customize, and you can find the plate height right here. As long as you have plate height selected, the plates per meter will also come up, and you can select asymmetry as well if that's something you're interested in looking at. And so there's my asymmetry, there's my plates. Okay, great. So I'm going to close this, and let's go do the streamlined version. All right, so here we are in the streamlined version of the evaluation module, and I just opened a different file name. And so what you'll see here is that the streamlined version of Unicorn automatically integrates something for you, and you can tell what it's integrated by. You see this little f of x over here. Right now it's integrated the UV curve. So I'm going to unclick that. The peak table on the bottom goes away. I'm just going to turn off the UV signal, in fact. So I'm just going to click on this blue dot, and now UV goes away. Here I have the conductivity curve, right? And I'm going to integrate that just by clicking this f of x. And there's my nicely integrated conductivity curve. I have a flat baseline, which is great. I do not have the plates column down here, so I'm going to click on this little gear, and I'm going to select plates per meter, and also I'm going to do asymmetry, which is right here. All right, and there you go. They're in the table below, and I want the peak that's at 3,326 mils. So that's this one right here, peak A. I'm just going to get rid of this because it's just ridiculous. Okay, so right here I can see that peak A has an asymmetry of 1.01, which is excellent, right? And I have a plates per meter of 3,388. So look for my video about writing a method for determining the number of plates you have. Remember, the more plates you have per meter, the better your column. Your setup is very important to reproducing your results, and it is best to use a method. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope this helps you with your purifications.